بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. To continue in the study of Al-Ibanah Sughra of Ibn Battah rahimahullah, he now says وقال عامر ابن عبد الله ما ابتدع رجل بدعة إلا أتى غدا بما كان ينكره اليوم. That a man does not innovate in innovation except that he comes the day after with what he rejects today. As for Amir ibn Abdullah, then he is the son of Abdullah ibn Zubair, the Sahabi. Amir ibn Abdullah, meaning the son of Abdullah ibn Zubair, the Sahabi, radiallahu anhum. Imam al-Dhahabi, he mentioned about Amir that he was an imam and a worshipper. He was an imam and a worshipper. Now in this narration of Amir, in it is a warning against innovation, for it is showing that the one who goes from one innovation, he's going to go to another one. The one who has innovation, he's going to go from one to another innovation. So today he calls it innovation, and then tomorrow he's going to fall into a greater innovation. He's going to keep going from stage to stage. And then he goes to a greater one, and he starts to reject the first one. And then later he comes into a greater one until some of them may even leave the fold of Islam because of the innovation that they fell into. Imam Al-Barbahari, he says, and beware of small matters that have been newly introduced, because small innovations, they grow until they become large. This is what happened with every innovation introduced into this ummah. Initially, it was something small, having resemblance to the truth. So those who entered into it were misled by this. Then they were unable to depart from it, so it grew larger, and it became the religion which they followed. So the person diverged from the straight path and exited from Islam. Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, when he explained this point, he said innovation is actually like a burning piece of coal. Like a burning piece of coal. Even if it is small, then the fire will grow until it burns a whole house or the shop or a whole town. And he mentions the statement that they mentioned, and most fires come about on account of sparks which are thought little of. Most fires, they come out of sparks that no one thought anything of. Then he says, so one should not be careless about them, rather totally closing the door to innovation altogether. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, beware of newly introduced affairs. And this statement of the Prophet sallallahu iyyakum is an unrestricted warning against newly introduced innovations, whether they be small, newly introduced affairs, or large newly introduced affairs. The Messenger ﷺ did not make an exception, neither for the small nor the large. All of them is prohibited. All innovation prohibited. Now Al-Shatibi in Al-I'tisam, he says the same way that which is haram, there's major things that are haram and there's minor things that are haram. The same applies to innovations. There's major innovations and there's minor innovations, based on how they vary in severity. Not that there's any innovation that's okay. Every innovation is dalalah. Every innovation is misguidance. Every innovation is haram. But they vary in the severity of them, in the sense that this one is more major compared to the one that is minor. The one that's compared to Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, he says every bid'ah in the religion, then it is haram and it is misguidance. Due to the statement of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَمُحْدَثَاتُ الْأُمُورِ, beware of newly innovated affairs. فَإِنَّ كُلُّ مُحْدَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. Every newly innovated affair is innovation, and every innovation is misguidance. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, مَنْ أَحْدَثَ فِي أَمْرِنَا هَذَا مَا لَيْسَ مِنْهُ فَهُوَ رَدٌّ. Whoever innovates this matter of ours, that which is not from it, will have it rejected. وَمَنْ عَمِلَ أَمَلًا لَيْسَ عَلَيْهِ أَمْرُنَا فَهُوَ رَدٌّ. And whoever does an action which you have not commanded, will have it rejected. Until he says, وَمَعْنَى ذَلِكَ أَنَّ الْبِدْعَ فِي الْعِبَادَاتِ وَالْإِعْتِقَادَاتِ مُحَرَّمَةٌ. Whether the innovations in acts of worship or in beliefs, it is haram. It is haram, all of them. Example he mentions, then he says here, وَلَكِنَ التَّحْرِيمِ يَتَفَاوَتْ بِحَسْبِ نَوْعِيَّةِ الْبِدْعَةِ. That the prohibition of that innovation is going to differ and vary into the severity of that innovation is committing. For example, some innovation is clear kufr. Some innovation is clear disbelief. Like at-tawaf bil-qubur. Like circulating around the graves, تَقَرُّبًا إِلَى أَصْحَابِهَا, seeking nearness to the inhabitants of the grave. That's innovation, and that is clear kufr. وَتَقْدِيمُ الذَّبَائِحِ وَالنُّذُرُ لَهَا, and also giving slaughter and vowing to the people of the grave. وَدُعَاء أَصْحَابِهَا وَالْإِسْتِغَاثَ بِهِمْ, and making dua to the inhabitants of the grave and seeking their help and aid at times of difficulty. وَكَأَقْوَالِ غُلَاةِ الْجَهْمِيَّةِ وَالْمُعْتَزِلَةِ, like the statements of the extreme Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. And then there's innovations that could be fisk. It's evil, it's a sin. Like the belief of the Khawarij, the Qadariyah, the Murji'ah in their statements and their beliefs, which oppose the legislative evidences. Until the end of his statement. The scholars, when they explain this, that the innovators, they go from something which was small to something which was later on large. They give a well-known story, and Imam Al-Albani and other scholars, they mention this. The story of when Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu entered the masjid after the death of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and he's seen people in circles. This one saying do dhikr this many times, and this one saying do dhikr this many times. And he didn't reject it upon them until he went to get Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. And when Mas'ud radiallahu anhu came, he rejected that upon them, and he said, "Kam min muridin lil khayr lam yusibhu." How many people they wanted good but didn't attain the good? Until the end of the story, the consideration here is when the narrator of that narration, he mentions, فَلَقَدْ رَأَيْنَا أُولَٰئِكَ الْأَقْوَامِ يُقَاتِلُونَنَا يَوْمَ النَّهْرَوَانِ. He said, those people that were in the masjid that day, doing that bid'ah, which was dhikr in a way that the Prophet didn't legislate, and the Sahaba, they weren't accustomed to doing it. Those people that were doing that innovation, what happened to them later on? They were the same ones that fought against Ali radiallahu and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. They were the same Khawarij that rebelled and fought against Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. See how a small bid'ah took them to a major one. A small innovation of just doing dhikr in the masjid in a way that the Prophet didn't legislate took them to fighting against the Muslim and deeming the blood of the Muslims to be halal. And this is a story that they mentioned. For that is Imam Al-Albani says, Allahu Akbar, Ashabul Halakat, alay kanu, that the people of a sitting, a garden, they used to do this, bil hasa, with the pebbles, asbahu khawarij diddu Ali. They are the ones that became Khawarij, opponents of Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu anhum. وَقَاتَلُوا عَلِي فَقَاتَلْهُمْ عَلِي وَقَاتَلْهُمْ وَاسْتَأْسَلْ شَأْفَتَهُم. He says, look, this is why the scholars say, إِنَّ الْبِدْعَ الصَّغِيرَةَ تُؤَدِّي إِلَى الْبِدْعَةِ الْكَبِيرَةِ. The statement of the scholars is that a minor innovation is going to lead to a bigger innovation. A minor innovation is going to lead to a more major innovation. So these people, they were just counting dhikr with hasa, with pebbles, telling one another do dhikr 50 times just one day, subhanallah, 50 times, in a way that the Prophet legislates. And then a few years later, they are the Khawarij, they are fighting against Ali ibn Abi Talib and deeming the blood of the Muslims to be halal. Tayyib. Now, if you're to look at that, the Khawarij, for example, the Khawarij, they started off by a man called Dhul Khuwaysirah, who the scholars, they declare or they consider him to be Abul Khawarij, the father of the Khawarij. This man, he said to the Prophet ﷺ, "I'dil, be just." The Prophet replied to him, فَإِن لَمْ أَعْدِلْ فَمَنْ يَعْدِلْ. If I am not just, who else will be just? This Dhul Khuwaysirah, Shaykh al-Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah and other scholars, they say he died a munafiq, a kafir. Number one. What was the point of it? He wanted justice. He came with something that looked like truth, but it wasn't truth. As Ali ibn Abi Talib, kalimatul haq yuridu biha al-batil. When they tried to rebel against Ali ibn Abi Talib, they said, we want in al-hukmu illa lillah. We want the judgment to be only for Allah. He says, kalimatul haq yuridu biha al-batil. A statement of truth that they want falsehood by way of. So this man, he's Abul Khawarij, the father Khawarij. This is what he wanted. Later on, they fought against Uthman ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, and killed him. They killed Uthman ibn Affan. And then they fought against Ali, saying that Ali doesn't rule by the judgment of Allah. See how they started and where they came from? Was statements that people thought was the truth. In al-hukmu illa lillah. The ruling is only for Allah. They came from this door. People thought it was the truth. Until later on, if you're to look at the beliefs of the Khawarij and the groups of the Khawarij and how evil they became, some of them even became groups of the Kuffar by consensus of the scholars. And they even had issues when it came to fiqh. For example, Aisha radiallahu anha, when Mu'adha, she came to Aisha, مَا بَالُ النِّسْوَةِ تَقْضِي الصَّوْمَ وَلَا تَقْضِي الصَّلَاةِ. Why do the women, when they're in their menstruation cycle, they make up the fast and they don't make up the salah? What did she reply to her? Anyone know what she replied to her? أَهَرُورِيَّةٌ أَنْتِ. Are you from the Khawarij? Because the Haruriya in Harura were the Khawarij. She said, are you from the Khawarij? Are you from those people? لا لست من الخوارج لكن أسأل. لست حرورية لكني أسأل. She said, I'm not from them, but I'm just asking. What's the shahid? That their belief system became even messed up in regards to fiqh. It went from small innovation, something that people thought was looking like truth, and then became even worse later on. Ibn Hazm, he also mentioned regarding some of the groups of the Khawarij, that by consensus they're not Muslims. The Khawarij is not only one group, they have different groups amongst them. There's a nice book by a scholar called As-Saksaki Al-Hanbali. It's a book called Al-Burhan. And this book Al-Burhan, it discusses many of the groups and the different groups that fall under that major group. And from them, what they mentioned regarding some of the Khawarij, that their deviation took them so far that some of them said Salah is only one rak'ah. Salah is only one rak'ah. Some of them, they went so far to even saying Surah Yusuf is not from the Quran. Why? Because it says too much mercy in it. Look at how a small innovation, something that started small, became so major and so deviant that they left the fold of Islam, some of those groups, because the deviant ideology they had. On top of that, they started to look at those who were before them as watered down. They started to look at their forefathers and those who started their madhab as being watered down. And for that reason, you find the Khawarij used to fight each other. Showing us that the statement of Amir, that a person falls in innovation and tomorrow is going to come with one greater than that, this is the reality of the groups. The Shia, how did they start? They said Ali is better than Uthman and better than Shaykhain. Until later on they came and they said to Ali, Anta al-Ilah, Anta who? You are him. فَلَمَّا رَأَيْتُ الْأَمْرَ Ali ibn Abi Talib said, فَلَمَّا رَأَيْتُ الْأَمْرَ when he said, I seen the affair to be very evil, دعوت بِشْعَالِ النَّارَ دعوت الْقَنْبَرَ. He said, I called Qanbar, which was his person that he took care of it, to get the fire ready and burn all of them. But look how they started. They said Ali is better than this one and that one, until they went to a point where they said Ali is Allah. A'udhu billah. How an innovation started so small and becomes so large. So this is clear proof that a person stays away from innovation, whether small or large. And to further prove that point, the scholars mentioned narration Muawiyah radiallahu an in Sunan Abi Dawud, not in it, that the Prophet ﷺ said, there will appear among my community people who will be dominated by desires, like rabies which penetrates its patient. There will appear amongst my ummah people who will be dominated by desires like rabies which penetrates its patient. Penetrates its patient, there remains no vein and no joint, but it penetrates it. Something starts small, rabies spreads quick. The same way innovation starts small and it spreads very quick. And it spreads very quick and it becomes greater. Then he says, وَقَالِ ابْنُ عَوْنَ إِذَا غَلَبَ الْهَوَى على القلب استحسن الرجل ما كان يستقبحه. That if the desires overpowers the heart, then a man considers that which he used to deem good, considers to be abhorrent, to be bad. As for Abdullah ibn Awn al-Basri, he's an imam, and they say he was a qudwa, a leader, and he was a scholar of Basra. He is from the students of Ibn Sirin, Ash-Sha'bi, Hasan al-Basri, Mujahid, and others. Until this imam reached such a level, some of the scholars, they said, لَمْ تَرَى عَيْنَايَ مِثْلِ Ibn Awn. Some of the scholars of his time, they said, my eyes have never seen anyone like Ibn Awn. And this is a time period of full many scholars. And he's saying, many of them said that, my eyes have not seen a man like Ibn Awn. Kharij ibn Mus'ab, he said, صَحِبْتُ Ibn Awn 24 سَنَةً. I accompanied Ibn Awn for 24 years, he said. فَمَا أَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْمَلَائِكَةَ كَتَبَتْ عَلَيْهِ خَطِيئَةً. And I don't know in those 24 years that the angels wrote any sin upon this man. Look at the righteousness of this man. He said, I accompanied him 24 years and I don't know in those 24 years that the angels wrote a bad deed upon this man. Salam ibn Abi Muti', he said, كَانِ ibn Awn أَمْلَكُهُمْ لِلِّسَانِهِ. From the attributes he had is that he used to control his tongue a lot. He used to control his tongue and withhold his tongue. Ibn al-Mubarak, who was a great imam in Islam, and from the students of Ibn Awn, he said, مَا رَأَيْتُ أَحَدًا مِمَّنْ ذُكِرَ لِي إِلَّا كَانِ إِذَا رَأَيْتُ دُونَ مَا ذُكِرُ. I have never seen anyone who was mentioned to me, except that when I met him, he was lesser than the degree that I was told of. He was lesser than what I was told about him. إِلَّا Ibn Awn. Except for Ibn Awn. When I seen him, he was greater than that which was described to me. Also, Uthman ibn Sa'id, he said, سَأَلْتُ Ibn Ma'in and Ibn Awn. Ibn Ma'in is the companion of Imam Ahmed. He said, I asked about Ibn Ma'in, فَقَالَ هُوَ فِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ ثِقَةٍ. He is trustworthy in everything. He is trustworthy in everything. Also, it's said from Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, مَا كَانَ بِالْعِرَاقِ أَحَدٍ أَعْلَمْ بِالسُّنَّةِ مِنْ Ibn Awn. There was no one in Iraq that was more knowledgeable of the Sunnah than Abdullah ibn Awn. And for that reason, it's a famous narration from him that at the time when he was dying, he said, As-sunnah was sunnah, as-sunnah wa yaku al-bid'ah hatta mat. That the sunnah, cling on to the sunnah, hold on to the sunnah and stay away from innovation until he passed away, rahimahullah. And reading stories like this of this imam and other imams of that time, a time when Islam had great imams and many of them spread, is something that a student knowledge finds in it joy of reading these kind of statements to these people of the past. And these are salaf, these are our righteous guided predecessors. These are the people that we are supposed to be looking up to. These are our stars. For Ahlul Islam, these are the stars of our ummah. We don't have stars like these people have on Instagram and these people have on social media and sports and this. These are our superstars. These are those superstars of our ummah that the scholars, they mention in their books. Now he said if desires overpowers a person's heart, then he will start to think what he deemed bad to be good. And this is what we mentioned before, that a person, once he falls into desires, he becomes deaf into the truth. He becomes deaf to the truth. He can't hear it no more. He becomes mute from speaking the truth and he becomes blind from even seeing the truth. You would try to give him 100 evidences, 1,000 evidences, it's not reaching him. Because his desires have got a hold of him. And it's hard for him to come out of that. Now, even if today or yesterday, he used to think something was good, now he thinks it's bad. You'll find some of your companions that are upon khair. You see them a few years later, they've changed on you. And you say to him, didn't you say this was good and this was bad before? And he doesn't understand no more. He doesn't understand that before he used to say this was good and this was bad. Today he's completely a different person. Because his desires have got the best of him. And this is something a person should try his best to understand and stay away from. For that reason, Hudayfa ibn Yaman radiallahu anhu said, فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الضَّلَالَ حَقُّ الضَّلَالَ أَنْ تَعْرِفْ مَا كُنْتَ تُنْكِرُ وَأَنْ تُنْكِرُ مَا كُنْتَ تَعْرِفْ. He said, know that the true misguidance is that you start acknowledging that which you used to reject and you start rejecting that which you used to acknowledge. This is true misguidance. And you find this a lot. Then he says, وَقَالَ الْفُضَيْلِ لَا يَزَالُ الْعَبْدِ مَسْتُورًا حَتَّى يَرَى قَبِيحَهُ حَسَنًا. That a slave will remain covered over until he sees his ugly side as something good, which is when he will be exposed. Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad, then he is an imam as well, a leader, trustworthy, Shaykh al-Islam, Abu Ali. And from his teachers is that great imam we mentioned before, Al-A'mash and others. Now Fudayl ibn Iyad, if you read his biography, you'll find many statements of great wisdom. And that this man, his attachment was to the akhirah. He didn't have any attachment to this dunya. He didn't have any attachment to this dunya. And that he left off this dunya and he was occupied with the hereafter and worship. And this man, his humbleness was clear from the stories that they mention about him. From the wise statements that they mention about him, he said, Ya miskin, O poor person, anta musi wa tara annaka muhsin. You are evildoer, but you think you're doing good. You're an evildoer, but you think you're doing good. وَأَنْتَ جَاهِلْ وَتَرَى أَنَّكَ عَالِمٌ. And you're ignorant, but you think that you're knowledgeable. وَتَبْخُلْ وَتَرَى أَنَّكَ كَرِيمٌ. And you're a miser and cheap, but you think that you're generous. وَأَحْمَقْ وَتَرَى أَنَّكَ عَاقِلٌ. And you're foolish, but you think that you're intelligent. أَجَلُكَ قَصِيرٌ. Your lifespan is short. وَأَمُلُكَ طَوِيلٌ. But your hopes are large. Your hopes are long. Al-Dhahabi, when he commented on this statement of Fudayl, he said, قُلْتْ إِي وَاللَّهِ صَدَقْ. He said, by Allah, he told the truth. وَأَنْتَ ظَالِمٌ وَتَرَى أَنَّكَ مَظْلُومٌ. You're an oppressor and you think that you're oppressed. وَآكِلٌ لِلْحَرَامِ وَتَرَى أَنَّكَ مُتَوَرِّعٌ. And you eat haram, but you think you're pious. وَفَاسِقٌ وَتَعْتَقِدْ أَنَّكَ عَدْلٌ. And you're evildoer, but you think that you're a person who is just. وَطَالِبُ الْعِلْمِ لِلدُّنْيَا وَتَرَى أَنَّكَ تَطْلُبُهُ لِلَّهِ. And you seek knowledge for the وَطَالِبُ الْعِلْمِ لِلدُّنْيَا. You seek knowledge for the dunya, but you think that you're seeking it for Allah. And he was from the Imams of the Sunnah, and he defended the Sunnah. From his statements was that نَظُرْ رَجُلْ إِلَى صَاحِبِ الْبِدْعَةِ يُورِثُ الْعَمَى. That looking at the person of innovation brings blindness. And he said, مَنْ جَلَسَ مَعَ صَاحِبِ بِدْعَةِ لَمْ يُعْطِ الْحِكْمَةِ. And a person who sits with an innovator, he will not be given wisdom. Al-Dhahabi, and I want to mention this next point about him as well. Al-Dhahabi mentioned that Ibn Mahdi, he said about Fudayl ibn Iyad that he wasn't a hafiz, that he wasn't a strong memorizer of hadith. Al-Dhahabi commenting on this, he said, لم يكن في علم الحديث كهؤلاء الحفاظ البحور. Yes, he wasn't like those major memorizers of hadith, like those oceans of memorization, like Shu'bah, like Malik, like Sufyan, like Hamad, like Ibn Mubarak, and similar to them. But look at what he says here. لكنه ثبت قيم بما نقل. He was firm with that which he, and trustworthy with that which he relayed. ما أخذ عليه في حديث ما علمت. I don't know any mistakes that it was mentioned about him in regards to hadith. But then he says, وهل يراد من العلم إلا ما انتهى إليه الفضيل. Is the intent of knowledge not other than what Fudail ended up with? The intent of knowledge, what Fudail ended up with? Piety, righteousness, worshipping Allah, not being attached to the dunya, being humble, staying away from the dunya, loving the akhirah, worshipping Allah day and night. This is what the knowledge should get you to. Knowledge is not kathatul riwayah, having a lot of knowledge. Oh, this one said this, hadithana kadha, this one said this shaykh said. That's not knowledge. Knowledge is piety. And attain that piety is what Fudail attained. And this is what Al-Hafidh Al-Dhahabi is mentioning. For there is a scholar say, ليس العلم بكثرة الرواية إنما العلم خشية الله. Knowledge is not by a lot of narrating. Knowledge is the fear of Allah. Knowledge is the fear. That is what a person seeking knowledge is trying to attain. Trying to attain the fear of Allah, not just having a lot of knowledge. A person can have a lot of knowledge, doesn't mean anything if he doesn't have the fear of Allah in his heart. Now, the statement of Al-Fudail, where he mentioned, rahimahullah, that a slave will remain covered until he sees his ugly side as something good, which is when he will be exposed. The scholars explain this. Shaykh al-Raji and others, they mention here what he's saying is that a person continues to be hidden until he sees evil to be good. When he follows his desires, once he follows his desires and leaves off that which the text indicate upon, his affair becomes exposed. He exposed himself with the innovations and the desires he has. But before that, he was hidden. He was trying his best. He was fighting against his soul not to fall into desires and innovations. He was hidden. But once he fell into innovations, he became exposed. He became exposed and he opposed the textual evidences and he fell into misguidance. Then he says, Abu al-Aliya al-Riyahi, he said, آيتان في كتاب الله ما أشدهما على الذين يجادلون في القرآن. Two verses in the book of Allah, how severe they are upon those who dispute regarding the verse of Allah. Allah says, ما يجادل في آيات الله إلا الذين كفروا. None dispute regarding the verse of Allah except for those who disbelieve. And Allah says, وَإِنَّ الَّذِينَ اخْتَلَفُوا فِي الْكِتَابِ لَفِي شِقَاقٍ بَعِيدٍ. And surely those who differ regarding it are totally engrossed in opposition. This narration of Abu al-Aliya, and Abu al-Aliya is a tabi'i, from the tabi'in, the great ones. He was a scholar of Quran, a memorizer of hadith, and a mufassir. They say he was alive during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Yes, he was alive during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but he was a young boy. He was at the youthful age. And he accepted Islam during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. And he heard from great Sahaba like Umar, Ali, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Abi Dhar, Ibn Mas'ud, Aisha, and other than them radiallahu anhum. And they say when he memorized Quran, he read Quran upon Ubay ibn Ka'b, which is one of the Sahaba that the Prophet said, take the Quran from. One Sahaba that the Prophet said, take the Quran from was Ubay ibn Ka'b. And he took the Quran from him. And he also took it from Umar and other than them radiallahu anhum like Ibn Abbas. Now, from his statements, he said, تعلموا القرآن. Learn the Quran. فإذا تعلمتموه فلا ترغبوا عنه. Once you learn the Quran, do not turn away from it. وإياكم وهذه الأهواء. And beware of these desires. فإنها توقع العداوة والبغضاء بينكم. It's going to bring enmity between you. It's going to bring enmity between you. فإنا قد قرأنا القرآن قبل أن يقتل يأني عثمان ب15 سنة. For indeed we read the Quran before Uthman was killed by 15 years. Abu al-Aliya, from his humbleness and his shyness and fearing of Allah, they say if more than 4 people would say with him, he would get up and leave because he feared for himself. Showing what? Some of these scholars, they didn't want large gatherings. Some people now, they think large gatherings is the base. Like everyone has to have a lot. If there's no large gathering, that means that person has no knowledge. There was imams in the past, like Abu al-Aliya, Waqi', he said, كَانَ إِذَا جَلَسُوا الثَّلَاثَ تَرَكَهُم. If 3 people sat with Waqi', he would leave them. Shaykh al-Uthaymi, from his stories, they mentioned that sometimes you come to the masjid, there'd be no students. He would pick up the mushaf and he would read the mushaf. This Imam al-Uthaymin. I mention this, why? Because some people, they have a misconception. If there's not a large number, that means that person has no knowledge. If a large number are not attending, that means that person is ignorant. No, large numbers upon the truth is khair. Some of the scholars had 20,000 students. Some of the scholars had many more students, a lot of students in those times. But if a person doesn't have a lot of students, it's not a proof that he's not knowledgeable. And these are great imams. Abu al-Ali is from the great imams of this ummah. He's saying if 4 people sat with him, he would leave. Showing us how these imams didn't care about numbers. Numbers is not something that was their mizan, their scale. If there's large numbers, this is the truth, and if it was large numbers, this is falsehood. No. Rather, there were people that stuck to the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Anyone know any narration of Abu-Aliyah? Anyone memorize the narration of Abu-Aliyah that he said something? No one here memorized the narration of Abu-Aliyah? Then we have to go back to your revision session. Who said Thana'ullahi alayhi fil mala'il a'la? Abu-Aliyah. That the salah upon the Prophet means Allah mentioning him amongst the gathering in the best of gatherings, the malaika. This Abu-Aliyah Riyahi, he's the one who mentioned this. So you memorize some of his statements, rahimahullah. Now, the statement of him that he's mentioning it is that they indicate that these two verses indicate that those who dispute in regards to the Quran are dispraiseworthy. And that this is an attribute of the non-Muslims, as comes in the first verse. Allah says, مَا يُجَادِلُ فِي آيَاتِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. None disputes over the book of Allah in regards to the verse of Allah except for those who disbelieve. And this verse, the people of innovation have a resemblance of the people of kufr in regards to this aspect. You'll find them disputing regarding the book of Allah often. They dispute about everything over the book of Allah. This one says that Allah, when he says, for example, the Quran created, is the Quran not created? They dispute billah. They'll say that Allah rises above his throne, he not rises above his throne. They will dispute about everything. So their similarity in this dispute of their doing is similar to that of the people of kufr, as comes in this verse. Also, the second verse, Allah is warning here from disputing regarding the verse of Allah in falsehood, and that is an attribute of the disbelievers, and that these people are engrossed in opposition. And that their opposition and their hearts are split due to their disputing and evading and not agreeing upon the truth. For that reason, you find the scholars, when they mention Ahlul Sunnah, they say Ahlul Sunnah are Ahlun lil Ijtima'. They are people of gathering upon the truth. We have Ijtima'. Ahlul Sunnah has Ijtima'. The Quran is one. The Sunnah of the Prophet is one. The Sahaba is what we follow. What their understanding. Their way is known. They don't have differing and like these other people they have. The people of innovation, they're called Ahlul Furqah. People are splitting and deviating and not being upon one way. Why? Because they are going back to their intellects. They're going back to their desires. For that reason, you find much splitting amongst them. As a benefit, Imam Al-Uthaymeen mentions that from the benefits of this verse is that the kuffar, they're eager to put away the truth of Islam. They're very eager to put away the truth of Islam. What's some of their strategies? Number one, they dispute. They try to use dispute as a means to get rid of Islam. They'll dispute with the Muslims to try to put doubt in their heart to get rid of Islam. The same way the people of innovation, to call you to the innovation, they're going to dispute with you to get rid of the sunnah that is in your heart. For that reason, the scholars have mentioned, if they fail at this part, if they fail at disputing and argumentation, they go resort to fighting. They resort to fighting. The kuffar, in the history of Islam, they fought against the Muslims to try to get rid of Islam. يريدون أن يطفئوا نور الله ويأبى الله أن يتم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. They want to get rid of the light of Allah, but Allah rejects that upon them, and Allah will complete His light. The same goes for the people of innovation. مبتدع الرجل بدعة إلا استحل السيف. No one innovates innovation except that he deemed the sword to be allowed to be used against the Muslims to support his innovation. That is one of their ways to dispute against. If they lose in disputing and argumentation, they're not going to resort to fighting. Next one is that in these verses is a warning from disputing with the kuffar. The same way applies to the people of innovation. You shouldn't dispute with them, as we went through those narrations, because it might lead to doubt. And many of the people that do these disputes, they don't have a weapon with them, and that is knowledge. If a person is a scholar and disputes them to clarify the issue, that's different. But majority of those who dispute with these people, they don't have a weapon with them, which is knowledge. So they end up losing the dispute, and then they end up having doubt in their heart. Another point that he mentions here is that if a person is going to argue and dispute with them, and he's knowledgeable, he must have knowledge of their way when doing so. He must be aware of their way and the doubts that they have and the points that they may bring. Because how can you go to dispute without knowing what he's going to bring you? This shows us that majority of those who are disputing online nowadays with the people of innovation, or other than them from the different groups, they don't fall into this category. They don't have knowledge of who they're disputing with, number one. They don't have knowledge of the madhab of Ahlul Sunnah in reality, the deep meanings of it. And they don't have knowledge in a way that they can win that dispute. So you find them losing that dispute. And then you go into the comment section and you find people saying, I think that innovator won this dispute. Or won this debate. What did you just do? You let the people of innovation have the upper hand over you. And now you brought doubt to masses of Muslims because you lost that debate. Showing it's not praiseworthy. Don't be from those, and I mention this often because there are some brothers that they'll message you and they say, what if I, learn this? I want to tomorrow call to Islam and argue with this group and that group. No, this is not for you and not for me and not for any of us. This is for scholars and strong sources of knowledge, and they'll deal with these affairs in a way that is right, that is outlined by the scholars. We'll stop with this much. If there's any quick question, we'll take now. If not, continue next week, inshallah. Yes.